Hello, and welcome to the Storied Arcs podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today, we are entering a new season of the Storied Arcs podcast. And this one is a little off the beaten path for us. We're going to look into top 10 from Alan Moore, Gene Ha.
And Zander Cannon, yeah.
And Zander Cannon. And we are doing a deep dive on the original series, but not all the appendages that go along with it, which is a little out of habit for us. And then it's also our first crack at America's Best Comics.
Yeah.
And then, I don't want to bury the lead here. We're going to talk about Alan Moore. But I say we jump into America's Best Comics because this is one of those that I just quick by way of how I came to the book. I had never heard of the book. Obviously, I know Alan Moore, but the great Gene Ha was coming to Cincinnati for the Comic Expo a few years ago.
Yeah,
and I was talking to you about what should I get signed? I've got his New 52 Action Comics, number 9 or whatever it was, that first Black Superman, and I was like, that's the obvious, duh, I'll get that one. What else? And you said, I can't remember exactly what it was, but you said that something like top 10 number 8 or something was one of your favorite comics of all time.
Yeah. So in something we'll get to, this will be in our second discussion, probably get a little more of it, but top 10 number 8, I'm burying the lead there. Back in 2006, Wizard magazine, which used to be the comics industry magazine, it was a standard for many years. That kind of it was like the trade magazine for comics. Shortly before it and every other magazine went under, in 2006 they released a list that was titled something like the 100 best single issues released since you were born, which is strange because it was since you were born, you the reader born. I don't know what it was. And top 10 number 8, which is called the Overview, came in at number 1. And going back to 2006 here, I mean, there are 5 issues of Sandman on the whole list, and some of the great ones, and they included prestige issues of a Batman Holy Terror or Batman Killing Joke that are technically one issue, but they're an over. So there's a little bit of a cheat there for a standalone thing that could basically be its own.
It's category fraud. That's all it is. Yeah,
kind of, but it's basically what's the best hand someone one book of something, one published thing, and it said top 10 number 8 came out on that list as the number 1, and so that I think lent a lot of credence, and so that was 2006, and so that was 6 years after that issue came out, 5 years after the series ended, the original top 10 series ended. And I mean, I have that one and top 10 signed by Gene Ha. I've seen them both at shows. Assuming I'm never going to see Alan Moore to show because, not something he does. But yeah, so I mentioned that to you because really, in terms of an interior artist, I mean, top 10 is really the only stuff at that point I'd ever really read from Gene Ha. He's done a lot of covers. He's done a lot of spot runs more recently at especially at DC. Early in the 90s, he'd done some stuff in for Marvel, some miniseries stuff, and we'll get to that when we talk about it. But yeah, I hear Gene Ha, and for me, I think of top 10. So I think that's why I threw that out to you as a series to look into, because the series was great. And I'm guessing at that point, is that when you came around to reading it or eventually reading it?
My God. Well, it was one of those where, so I went to, this is esoteric Cincinnati trivia here. If you knew you needed to get single issues of a series from 25 years ago, probably knew, which shop would you go to?
I'd probably go to Mavericks.
That's exactly where I went.
Yeah.
I found 7 spot issues, so I bought them all, and then I was on this little quest, and we'll get into this later too, but it's not they're very valuable or expensive or whatever. It's just a relatively low print run, even though it was Alan Moore, I guess.
It was also just it's old, and
it's been collected so many times.
Exactly, yeah, and it's at a point now where the way you can read it, and we'll get this right now, I guess, when we say old, I mean the first issue came out in July 99. Series ran from July 99 to August 01. 12 issues. Again, that's all we're covering, the original first run, the first series of top 10. Yeah, those 12 issues, like you can find them in places. But yeah, it would have been a relatively low print run just because of the kind of the time and the era when it came out. And I think the people that have it are like probably a level of completionist for like Alan Moore or something like that. So not really selling it back. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
Like
No,
so
unless they're
yeah, so
unless it's part of an estate sale.
yeah, so yeah,
Um,
the idea that they're valuable and like not so much. I mean, I don't know exact. I mean, maybe number one has value, and number eight has this perceived value as being prestige, mainly because of that Wizard magazine article. Because if you were reading it comics at the time or you were aware of comics at the time, like that was something, Wizard was everything. And so they put a list out and it's like the 100 best and this is number one. And maybe it's a series that people haven't read as much, like Alan Moorehead's probably read it, but like it came out at a time when maybe folks weren't as aware of it because it wasn't like an issue of Batman or Superman or Spider-Man or something like that. They had their presence on that list, but for number one to be top 10, number eight, so there's a perceived value there, but you can find it. And the book's been out so long. I mean, initially it was collected in two trades, and the way that we're going to talk about it with our discussions is breaks down along the way that they were collected, which was 1 through 7 in volume one, and then 8 through 12 in volume two. So it didn't break down evenly in half. But those initial hardcovers and then eventual trades, I'm sure are long, 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 long out of print. But in recent years, there have been, new printings, I guess. The way I first read it was about 10 years ago when the first 12 issues were reprinted in a collected trade that was stamped by Vertigo. I think it was in 2015, so pretty much 10 years ago. And then just a couple of years ago, they released a full compendium with all of the top 10 material. The original top 10 series, the 12 issues we're talking about, plus all of these spinoffs, sequels, special one shots, all that. So that's only a couple years old.
well,
But
and long story short, that was the only way I actually ended up getting a hold of the whole thing.
yeah, yeah, it's
Was
going to be one of those two.
I never found all the issues,
Yeah.
and I never will.
Yeah. 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 Well, I mean, if you went through all the half price books around here, maybe a couple of flea markets, if you get up to Dayton, you could probably dig through and piecemeal them all together eventually at some point. I did at some point eventually. After I read all the issues, said that original new printing, which is that Vertigo printing of just this first 12 issues of top 10. So, but throughout all of this, I mean, DC has always been the parent company of whatever label has been on the books. And we mentioned America's Best Comics, which was an imprint that was initially started at Wildstorm, which was a studio we've mentioned a bunch of times with, like previously when we talked about like Ex Machina. Wildstorm was the studio started by Jim Lee over at Image when they broke away from Marvel, and each of the creators, the original founders, started their own studio. Wildstorm was Jim Lee's, and in the late '90s, he had approached Alan Moore about setting up his own imprint because Alan Moore at that point had worked for DC and had stopped working for DC and was doing independent stuff, and he had worked with at Rob Liefeld's company, which I think at that time was called Awesome Comics. Liefeld had just left DC, just left Image, started his own thing. Alan Moore was working with him, and then that was starting to fall apart. And then that's when Jim Lee approached Alan Moore about starting his own imprint. And they went with America's Best Comics, which I believe was the name of an imprint from the Golden Age, like in the 40s or whatnot, way back in the day. And so I think they inherited some of those characters with something that Alan Moore does and kind of repurposes them. But he was going to set up this imprint at Wildstorm. While they were doing that, and before anything was like any out, Jim Lee sold Wildstorm to DC, not knowing that Alan Moore basically had a blood feud with DC, which is funny now because Jim Lee runs DC. But he had no idea that because of the copyright issues surrounding Watchmen, which is you can go look up and read and see kind of what his beef is, legitimate beef. He had no idea that Alan Moore had said he would never work with DC, like vowed never to work with DC again. But ultimately, apparently, what Alan Moore said and what I've read and been reported, he looked at that and said, yes, while that was a personal stance, he had talked to a number of artists who he was going to work with at that Rob Liefeld Awesome Comics. A bunch of artists, they had talked about projects and they said they were going to work together. And ultimately he felt that his promise to them for work superseded his personal feud with DC. So he figured that stance was better to take, saying that we said we were going to work together. We weren't going to get a chance at the place we were, but now I have an opportunity to work this other place, even though it's essentially under the umbrella of people that I hate. I'm going to do that because that's worthwhile to do. And so
it's quite the ethical dilemma for an anarchist.
It really is. It really is. But I think he basically looked at my word to my collaborators.
I think I would have done the same thing.
Yeah, that means more than my personal vendetta. Yeah,
right. Yeah. I mean, and I think not to date this podcast by getting too modern with it, but I'm like, I don't know if in 5 years, Dustin Nguyen's best friend goes to write a book at Marvel and it's like, look, dude, I know you swore off Marvel, but we always said we wanted to do this character together, and Marvel owns that character, and I'm writing it, and I totally understand if you don't want to do it, and I could see someone like him coming around for like the same type of reason. It's like you got your buddies, you got your favorite characters, and there's like what Dustin didn't say is I don't like Marvel characters, and what Alan didn't say is I don't like DC characters. It's like, no, I don't like the leadership at DC Comics.
Exactly. I don't like the business aspect of it. So what became basically while and I think America's Best went on, I think, until about 2010 before it was finally shuttered, but it effectively became the place that Alan Moore wrote and published this. Like it was the Alan Moore imprint. It was like he was there to do his thing, and for the years he was working on it, maybe about 5 or 6 years or whatever, that was just his corner where all of his books were published under America's Best, and that's when the top 10 came out. So other books we'll talk about, like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Promethea, Tom Strong, all these written by Alan Moore, working with a bunch of great artists. ABC, American Best Comics, that was just basically the Alan Moore imprint that allowed him to do his thing. So, that is we'll call 1, 2, 3, 4. That was like the 5th era of Alan Moore comics, I think, really, if you break it down. As we mentioned,
crazy.
I mean, Alan, if we do the Mount Rushmore thing of comic creators, like just comic people, like he's on it. Like he just is,
right.
There are no superlatives that you're like, well, that's recency bias. Like, no, he is legitimately one of the greatest, one of the most important, one of the most influential creators in the history of the medium. I think undoubtedly in the past, 40 years, his mainstream comic career, he is the most important in the past 40 years. If you look at the almost 100-year history of comics, he's one of the 5 or 4 most important of all time. Like there's no hyperbole with that. But
I think when I think of modern writers, it's too banal to say that someone is like, oh, they're kind of doing an Alan Moore thing, or they're ripping off of Alan Moore there. It's like literally everyone does. Like that's like saying a band is stealing something from the Beatles. It's public domain. Like everyone, it's like that's what set the template for everyone who's reading comics now.
Yeah, there
everyone who's writing now.
There is a level. He's one of those guys that anyone working in comics now, or came into the business in the past 20, 25 years, maybe even 30 years, would have been like, at some point I read an Alan Moore comic and my brain melted, and it changed the wiring in my brain, and that allows me to write the way I write now. So his influence is beyond belief. But as I mentioned, he has these eras. His first era starting out working over in the UK, doing stuff for Marvel UK, 20,000 AD, the sci-fi magazine that we've mentioned. For that, if you're a comic person over in the UK, you have 2000 AD on your CV, like you've worked for them at the science fiction magazine. Another magazine called Warrior, a similar kind of sci-fi fantasy magazine. Warrior's important because that's where V for Vendetta started. It started as a strip there before being serialized, the book he did with David Lloyd. Another book that started over on Warrior was Marvel Man, originally called Marvel Man. eventually became Miracle Man. You want to fall down another publishing quagmire rabbit hole? Just look up the publishing history of Miracle Man and everything that's gone through, and then I'll see you in 4 days when you're done reading everything about that. But he gets a start there, and those are books that start as strips in Warrior, an anthology magazine, and that eventually becomes serialized and put out in kind of the more traditional, we think about, comic format, whether it a graphic novel or single issues. From there, off a lot of that work is when he starts his mainstream comic work in the U.S. He's brought over by Len Wein in 82 or 83 or something like that to do Swamp Thing, Saga of the Swamp Thing, a F-list character at that point, which he then immediately takes, completely revamps, brings in all these new revamps all these characters, co-creates John Constantine, and takes the Swamp Thing into just like this incredible prestige character that has become a launching point for so many other great horror and horror adjacent writers that go on to do great things at Marvel, like coming on and doing Swamp Thing for a stretch of time is like an important badge now, because Alan Moore made Swamp Thing something great. And so he
being able to borrow it, it's like one of the coolest standalone like single issues in the Tom King Batman run was like, wasn't there a Swamp Thing like Mitch did in like number 23 or something?
It was called The Brave and the Mold, which is phenomenal.
It was a great issue. It was just like, I think that was Tom King being like, I don't know if I'm going to get Swamp Thing, but if I'm the Batman writer, they can't deny me access to Swamp Thing.
Yeah. Well, and he did,
and I think that's true.
Off of that, he did a Swamp Thing special, but like you go back and look at the people that have written Swamp Thing after Alan Moore, and they're all people that went on to then do incredible things at DC. It was like it's like a starting point. You come in and you have your Swamp Thing story, just like you have in any other story. And the fact that people have Swamp Thing stories is because Alan Moore put that prestige dust on, and that was from the very jump. He's written two of the best Superman issues, literally, of all time. One with Dave Gibbons called For the Man Who Has Everything, which was a Superman annual, I believe, annual number. I'm not going to try to guess. I don't have it written down, or if I do, I can't read my own handwriting, which wouldn't be, out of the ordinary. But it's a standalone Superman annual for the Man Who Has Everything. It's basically Clark, Diana, and maybe Robin as well. Like they try to get Superman a birthday gift, and they find him trapped in like a hallucinatory dream and all that stuff. The other great Superman issue he did with legendary Superman artist Kurt Swan, called Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which was, I think, meant to be like the last Superman story before Crisis on Infinite Earths. So it was like we do this last story, and then the world, all of DC gets rebooted. But that's another just phenomenal Superman story. So again, we got two. You read any list of like read these Superman stories, whether they're issues or story arcs, those two stories are going to be on there. Like just bar none, they're going to be on the list. I already mentioned Dave Gibbons. He obviously did Watchmen. We're not going to harp on Watchmen because there's, I'm sure, like literally hundreds of like doctoral theses on Watchmen and its importance. It is also the reason why he doesn't work with DC anymore, or refuse to work with DC. But Watchmen, again, without saying, potentially the most influential comic of all time. The last thing to mention at DC, I'll mention it because it's popular. It's also a book that I personally kind of despise, is Batman the Killing Joke. He did that with Brian Boland. It is one of the most popular. People love it.
The thing is,
I don't, but yeah,
I enjoy it. I don't get the hype, and I hate when people are like, if you want to get to know Batman, read this one book. I'm like, that's a complete opposite of what it is.
Yeah. No, it's one of the most like misogynistic stories ever written. And Alan Moore is copped to that, where he's like, he looks back on it now and believes it's poorly written. And I don't know if that's just hindsight catching up to him, but Alan Moore seems to be like the kind of person that like, he's not swayed by what other people think about it. Like, I think he looks back on it, and if he says like, this was good, it was good. If he looks back on his work and says, this was bad, I believe it was bad. He's not disowned it, but he's been like, we probably could have done that one better. But again, it is one of the more popular of all time DC stories. So it is worth mentioning. After that, in the 80s here, again, kind of after the Watchmen fallout, he goes back to indie work. Couple of big things that come out of this time. This is when he does From Hell, which is his take on Jack the Ripper. He also does a book called Lost Girls, which is this very, very, very adult story about a grown-up Alice, Wendy, and Dorothy from Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, and Peter Pan. Wildly adult, like explicit comic. But that's in this era here, working indie work. After DC, he then moves into working on some Image books. I mentioned him working with Rob Liefeld, specifically on this character called Supreme, which Rob Liefeld had created as being this like very Rob Liefeld-esque like anti-hero Superman type character, like real gritty 90s crap, like the Superman but bad trope. Alan Moore agreed to come on if he was allowed to retool it, and he took it and slowly morphed that character into a like retelling and re-examination of 60s era like Silver Age Superman stuff, and took the book from like being bad to like critically lauded because he's Alan Moore, so just kind of sprinkling that old school like hopeful Superman stuff, not like the dark gritty deconstruction kind of thing that I guess people had known him for out of his DC work coming out of the 80s. When that falls apart, he goes into that's 1, 2, 3 again. So that Supreme area at Image, like era 4, moves into era 5, which was America's Best Comics, which we just mentioned. That sustains him through the late 90s, early aughts, and then from there he goes back like fully independent. I think he still has some books published, maybe carrying the America's Best imprint. Like I know after he left America's Best, he still had a couple volumes of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen that came out. And I don't remember exactly what those were published and printed under, but now that's kind of where he back is now, fully independent. Doesn't do a lot of comics now. I think he's written some novels, a couple things here and there. If they do come out, it honestly doesn't matter where it's published because no one's saying no to Alan Moore. But it's not like he's been real active in the past like 20 years.
Yeah, he pops up just enough. Well, that and all of his stuff is like shelf stable. Like,
well, yeah.
It's never
absolutely.
a flash in the pan. So he looms over comics even if he's not writing a monthly book.
Yeah, and so much of his stuff has been adapted. None of it adapted well.
And he's anti every adaptation.
Yes, yeah, but he has legit reason to be because all of his suck.
Sure, no, but he was against it. The premise of adapting it at all.
That is true.
I mean, there was some.
Well,
it might be apocryphal quote where he said something, but I think it was actually in back matter of a Watchmen reprint at some point where he said like, if I wanted to write a movie, I would have written a movie. If I wanted to write a TV show, I would write a TV show. I know how to do those things. I chose this medium because that's what this suits this story.
Yes. But and while I respect that it's his creation, all that misses the entire point of adaptation, which is why the best adaptation of his work, the only one good one, was the HBO series called Watchmen that Damon Lindelof show ran, because he wasn't adapting Watchmen. He was adapting the ideas of Watchmen. And that's why that worked. But yeah, all the movies that have done off his stuff are terrible. Like they're complete garbage.
Made Sean Connery quit acting.
Yes.
League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was so bad.
I
never saw it, but that is what I trust Sean Connery.
It's bad. I mean, the From Hell is bad. So V for Vendetta isn't terrible. It's definitely
that
not,
has to be the best one.
Yes, I think that is the best one, and at best, it is fine. Like at best, it's fine.
I think I like it a little more than that, and I think what Alan Moore didn't like about it is that they did adapt it. They moved it out of its original context and really made it more about authoritarianism and like the George Bush era and the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, which I think is a valid move at the time they made it.
Agreed.
But Alan Moore's like, that's not what I was talking about. It's like, right, it's an adaptation. He just doesn't understand adaptations.
Or he doesn't want to. So but yeah, it is. I mean, the last thing I'll say about him, Pretty much everyone on this list we're going to talk about, every creator has multiple Eisner Awards. He is 9 for 13 as best writer. He's been nominated 13 times. He's won 9 times. The next closest are two writers with 4. So and that's just best writer, the one that goes just to him. Doesn't count I think around maybe almost 24 other Eisners he's won for collaborative work, like best series or ongoing. Top 10 itself has 2 Eisners. In 2001, best new series. In 2001, it won best continuing series. So this series alone, we're talking about, won 2 Eisners. But he himself, he has 9 Eisners for best writer because he's Alan Moore. That's just who he is. So yeah, we just talked about him for however long, and that might be
scratch the surface. I mean, he's going to come up more as we're
maybe 15% of what he's done.
But in the first 5 pages of the first issue, I already felt myself. I was like, "Yep, this is where we're going to stop, and we're going to start talking about Alan Moore's style."
Yeah.
Like,
so
it's so Alan Moore.
Yeah,
to write the way he does.
It really is. And said his influence on comics is you legitimately can't state it, because it's so far and so wide, and it touches every aspect of the industry, that he is just, he's Alan Moore. That's all it is. And so tackling a book like this is like maybe the easiest way in terms of like what some of his other work are, just what he has to pick from. I will say, I think this is probably the work of his that I reread the most, because I think there's something different about it, even though it's not that it's like super light and heavy, but just the idea of the central construct of the comic, I think for me makes it very rereadable. You can go back to it. It's episodic in a way. It's procedural. That's kind of the point.
Right. Even though I was going to say the procedural of it all means once you've read it, it becomes non-sequential, right?
Exactly.
Like you can just go read number 8 again.
Exactly. Yeah. Once you know the characters, you just drop in. So yeah, that's all we're going to say about Alan Moore for now, because again, he's Alan Moore. From there, there are 2 artists. There's Gene Ha and Zander Cannon. So I was uncertain way back in the day. I didn't know kind of what the breakdown was of how this art team worked together, and it's only in recent years when I kind of understood better. There's some couple good articles and couple good interviews with them. What it comes down to is Zander Cannon, by the end of it, as I got into it, he did all the layouts. So he would get the scripts and do all the layouts and sequencing and all that. And then Gene Ha would come in and do the penciling and the inks, and they would work together that way. I think at the time when they were working on this, maybe they do still, they both lived in the same city. They were working out of Minneapolis at the time. I don't know if they both still lived there, but I think if they weren't in the same studio, their studios were literally next to each other. And so it was very collaborative that way in terms of how it worked together. So we'll start with Gene Ha, because I have him written down first on my list.
Well, he's second. Yeah. As you read the cover, it's Alan Moore, Gene Ha, Zander Cannon. So
it does. Yeah.
We'll say we're following that order.
We'll go with that. So top 10, I think, is by far his best known work. He's done a lot of work at DC, spot run issues, small miniseries, same at Marvel. I mentioned again, he did this Cyclops Jean Grey miniseries, and then he did some follow-ups on that. This is like in the mid 90s, and he won the Russ Manning like best newcomer Eisner Award for his work then. He has issues of Action and Detective, Batman, Superman, Green Lantern, all these things. He has a bunch of covers. He still has a bunch of covers and variant covers. He's one of those guys that people will go to. He'll do a cover or an incentive cover because people know who he is. He's a name that people go to. He has a book out that I really want to read. I didn't really know about it until fairly recently. It's a book that he wrote and drew that it started, I think, crowdfunded. I think it started at Kickstarter. And then eventually was picked up by Dark Horse. It's a book called May, M-A-E. It's kind of a portal time travel book, and I think the first 6 issues were released and published on Dark Horse, and then the next 6 issues, the second volume, were published by Lion Forge. I think it's just the 12 or 14 issues. I can't quite remember, but it seems like a pretty cool like portal time travel story about 2 sisters that Gene wrote and drew.
Is there a big cat on it?
Maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
maybe.
I'm like, it sounds so familiar, but
It, it,
I've not put hands on it.
it's neither have I. It's a book I want to go read. It's one of the that's been on my list for a while to try to find and read somehow. The one thing I would say people should definitely go read is very recent. He did an issue of One Woman Historia, which was a three issue series written by Kelly Sue DeConnick, where each issue was drawn by a different artist. The first issue was drawn by Phil Jimenez, second issue Gene Ha, and the third issue by Nicholas Scott. It's a beautiful Black Label. It was one of the launch. It was one of the announced launch Black Label titles. The first three titles that Black Label announced when they weren't the first release, the ones that were in the press release for the announcement of that imprint line. There was a Superman story, a Batman story, and a Wonder Woman story. This was the Wonder Woman story, and Gene Ha did issue 2. All those issues are incredible. They're beautiful. I think you can get the whole thing in like this incredible hardcover. I'd recommend that book. It is unbelievable. Each of those 3 artists are phenomenal, and they have so completely different styles, but it's so gorgeous with the magazine style Black Label books, the oversized. It looks absolutely unbelievable. So he did issue 2, but definitely go read the whole thing. I absolutely recommend One Woman Historia. Go check it out. Not just Gene's work, but again, Phil Jimenez and Nicholas Scott doing those issues. So good.
Man, yeah, I gotta add that to the list. I have not read that much Gene Ha. It's more when I bump into him in the course of things I'm already reading.
And that's the thing. He doesn't have like a bunch of like he was the artist on Superman or Detective for a year and a half or something like. He doesn't have that. He has a lot of indie work, a lot of creator-owned stuff. His work at DC is just like, a couple issues here, miniseries here. He just hasn't done a lot of that. A lot of his work has been done in the kind of independent sphere. So that's why I think top 10 is the one that he's best known for. And rightly so. It's phenomenal. So it's similar with Zander Cannon, who has a bunch of stuff, also has a lot of covers. He's had a lot of different roles as a writer, artist, inker, things like that. But if you read anything by Zander Cannon, I beseech anyone listening to this, go read Kaiju Max. It's a series that he wrote and drew for Oni Press. It's 6 volumes, 6 seasons, as they're called. Each of them is 6 issues. It is about a maximum security prison for kaiju, for monsters. It's the place where all the monsters go, where they're sentenced for their crimes, which could just be existing. But it's an island full of giant monsters to keep them away from humanity. And all the guards are like inspired by like Ultraman and things like that. It sounds ridiculous, and it is a beautiful, it's going to sound weird after what I just said. It's a beautiful, like emotional and deep story that is like a commentary on like the prison system and things like that, and how we treat these people. And some of these creatures, had no control or choice in how they were created or why they exist and things like that. But it is an incredible book that like I had people telling me to read for years, and I kind of was like, yeah, whatever, I'll get to it. Sat down and read all 6 a few years back, all 6 volumes. Phenomenal stuff. So if you read anything by Zander Cannon, Kaiju Max, go read it. It's awesome. The kind of book that maybe I would think about, maybe we could maybe talk about on this show. It's that kind of book. So maybe down the line,
and it's not a title by the name of it that I would have picked up naturally.
Yes. The title, the cover is very bright and colorful. Zander's style is like that. It, in a lot of ways, it belies what the content of the book actually is, and it's so good. I recommend people give it a shot. It sounds ridiculous. The premise is ridiculous, but the book is phenomenal. So maybe if you get a chance to read it, Mike, maybe down the line, it's a book we might consider talking about, because I really do truly love that book. So see, he's done a lot of other things as well, as both writer and artist and things like that, including some of the follow-up series to Top 10, kind of keeping in the creative family. But if you know him for one thing, you know Zander Cannon for Kaiju Max. So go read it. We should mention the colorist here, because I mentioned that Zander Cannon did the layouts, and then pencils and inks, I believe, were done by Gene Ha. The colors were done by Wildstorm FX, which isn't a person. Wildstorm FX was the in-house art studio at Wildstorm that just did work, like kind of like a factory line work. They did work for Wildstorm, obviously, DC, Image, Marvel. They do plenty of stuff like that. But however it was structured, however whatever their deal was working there, they didn't credit individual artists. It was, it went to the group, the studio. So I don't know if it was like the same people working on the book every time, or if it was whoever was free. Don't know how that worked, but when you see Wildstorm FX, know that it was a group of people. I think, at up to maybe a dozen or so more who just worked like kind of in a bullpen, and they were the in-house artist for Wildstorm and all that. So I wish I knew who it was specifically was working on these issues, but that wasn't how they rolled back then.
Yeah, it feels like there's probably apocryphal fan speculation out there on some subreddit.
Probably so.
Someone who claims, "Oh, I met so and so, and they said they were on the Wildstorm FX." It's okay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
You can probably never cobble it together.
Well, maybe, but I know some people who work there have gone on to then do work on their own and be credited, when they leave the studio. So maybe you could draw some connection in terms of style and all that, but who knows? I don't know. The last person we should mention not real briefly, but we should mention is the letterer, Todd Klein. Literally the greatest letterer of all time in history of comics. We mentioned him during our discussion of the Unwritten, because he's a letterer on that, and he did such an incredible job. If you go back and look at that, the variation of fonts that he used and letters that he used to denote the different worlds and spaces that the Unwritten encapsulates, because he did a lot of work at Vertigo, a lot of work at DC, but I don't think we mentioned him during the Zero. That I think when we talked about the Unwritten, we may have just focused on Carrying Gross, but we should mention Todd Klein. The Eisner for Best Letterer has been given out 32 times. First time in 1993. You want to guess how many times he's won out of that 32?
I'm going to go conservative and say, well, I mean, I kept getting higher and I keep talking myself down. I'm like, surely it's not. I have not looked it up. I'm going to say 20.
Close. 18.
18. Okay.
18.
I talked myself back up. I was like, yeah. But I was like 15 to 20. That's cheating to give a range. Yeah. But I'm like, could I name more than two other candidates? Yeah. Really? Steve Wands, would be like, I don't know if he's ever won.
I don't think he has one. And a lot of the letterers, some of the years he hasn't won, he's lost to creators that are cartoonists that write and draw and letter their own stuff. Like Stan Sakai has won a whole bunch for Usagi Yojimbo.
And that might frankly be about the work it was on rather than a
little bit so. But yeah, he's been nominated 19 times and he's won 18. So he's only lost one time out of the 32 years they've done it. His most notable work, I think, by far is Sandman, because when you look at Sandman, the stuff that he does there is absolutely mind-blowing. But again, he did a ton of Vertigo books, ton of DC books. Over at we mentioned the Unwritten, he did Fables. I believe he did I think he did every America's Best comic except League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I think that's the only America's Best book he didn't letter. I'm pretty certain. But like massive runs of Batman, Detective, Flash, Wonder Woman. He did all the original Suicide Squad. Just
I'm scrolling through it now. The Wikipedia page for Eisner Award for Best Letterers.
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's him in probably not that close of a second, but Stan Sakai is pretty high up there.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, there's maybe like 4 other winners total.
Yeah.
And great names in there.
Yeah. Well, and one of them is the name we've mentioned a bunch recently is Hatso Spinoffs.
Yeah, he's the most recent winner
because he is brand new to the industry and he is phenomenal. He is great, but Todd Klein is the godfather of this, and his work, it's legendary. He is the letterer, and so again, he was kind of he was the go-to guy for America's Best, and so obviously worked with some of the greats, and so yeah, well, we'll definitely be touching on his work as we go through top 10.
All right, should we pitched this book a little bit. I mean,
Yeah, we should talk about it. We already mentioned a little bit the procedural aspect of it, but did you find a good? I found an okay synopsis. I couldn't find like an official publisher synopsis.
I've got one on the back of I've got this is the 2023 DC, not Black Label, but DC compendium.
Yeah,
I was
that's
just texting Alex earlier today. I was like, and I guess we should note, before the end of the episode that we're going to break it the way the original trades broke it.
Yeah, I mentioned that. Yeah, so
Yeah,
1 through
which 1 through
7,
7.
8 through 12. Yeah. So that compendium, which is holding up, which is fantastic for an audio medium that none of you can see. But that compendium is probably the easiest way to get it. It's probably the most available right now. I did mention the version that I read, which had a Vertigo logo on the cover. That was a complete trade of the 1 through 12 issues that we're talking about. That came out in 2015. That's probably available somewhere out there. It's also, that one is probably also maybe a little more available if you can rent it or borrow it from a library digitally, something like that. So one of those two, either that 2015 Vertigo stamped one, which is just the 12 issues we're talking about, or the new compendium that is only a couple years old, which will only be, reading the first part of. But those are the ones you can probably get. So there's a synopsis on the back there, maybe. I wonder if it's similar to the one that I found.
Yes. Here it is. Created to solve problems of living with superpowered individuals, the good, the bad, the robots, and the gods. Neapolis is a city of wonders and of terrors. A city full of fine citizens who can read your mind, tell your future, and commit crimes unheard of in the rest of the multiverse. In our Neapolis, the officers of Precinct 10 stand against the chaos and sometimes cause it. I think it's a fair synopsis. I mean, it is. This is. If Watchmen were, this is very crude, but if Watchmen were his commentary on like DC's, post World War II superhero comics, I think this is his like X-Men. Like, yeah, it's just. There's so many of them. Everybody's got powers.
It's not. It's not X-Men in the way that there's a metaphor for otherness.
No, correct.
Yeah,
It's just that for people like me who are non-X-Men readers, it's just like there's like 400 characters. They all have powers. You're into all of them. They're all so cool, and it's just like an overwhelming. I'm used to reading one superhero or one superpowered character at most at a time.
Well, and I think the comparison I would make is if Watchmen is the deconstruction of what the superhero is, the superhero idea is, it's examining who are these people that put on masks and think they're trying to fight, like, what kind of individual would do that? Would either have powers or want to have or seek power. What does it take for an individual to do that? What he's done here in Top 10 in creating the city of Neapolis is every single person has powers. Everyone does. The random it's not a town. It's not a city that has that, like, literally every person, every good guy, every bad guy, every rando on the street, every pet, everyone has powers.
You go in for a domestic phone call.
Yeah.
The two superhero cops walk in and it's a domestic dispute between two superpowered people.
Exactly.
And it's like, what,
So the examination is, if everyone has powers, what does that mean? What it means is it just becomes society. If everyone has powers.
And it's a little different. I mean, I think what I like about it is that I think in like a bad, how in a lot of comics, the villains just get basically the opposite powers of the hero, and coincidentally they happen to be in the same sandbox.
Yes.
In a Captain America story where there's like, oh my gosh, someone reinvented the serum, and there's now 9 super soldiers, and it's like, well, at that point, if everyone's a super soldier, then no one's a super soldier. Yes. Same as I guess it was at Superman 2. Where like the other Kryptonians came down.
Zod,
yeah. And so, and it's like, oh, if everyone's Kryptonian, then no one is. You take away the advantages of that. That doesn't happen in Top 10.
Yes,
just because everyone has some ability does not put them all on equal footing.
Yes,
it's not that kind of bland.
Which again makes it a reflection in a way of society, in that. If
no
one,
the
powers are essentially inconsequential because they're just things that people can do. Because ultimately, what this book is it's a police procedural. I think I've seen somewhere where Alan Moore specifically said that Hill Street Blues was like a direct influence on this book and what he was trying to do. Hill Street Blues being the seminal cop drama from back in the day. It was the cop drama procedural on television, like before
Right.
NYPD Blue came along. Like Hill Street Blues was the show, and so he was trying to take that idea, I think, that kind of feel and vibe, and set it in this fantastical world of multiverse dimensions and powered creings and beings and all that stuff. And yeah, and this is what we're left with is this crazy kind of hodgepodge of characters that are just trying to get through their day, like you and I are just trying to get through our days. It's just that their world involves the fantastical, except that's their norm. It's fantastical to us, but it's not to them.
Yeah, I think it's probably more comparable to say like the wizarding world of Harry Potter, where there's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
there's goblins and there's elves and they've all got different powers,
yeah.
but like what I think was so appealing about those books were it's all new to Harry, but when he enters the world,
It's normal to them.
it's
Yeah,
normal to them. Yeah,
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
like their wand is just like having an extra hand, and that's like, yeah, that's how I slice potatoes. I
Exactly,
go
exactly. And
like
and
that.
and and one thing I think we'll talk about as we go through is because it's a world full of super powered people and multidimensional aspects, there are a ton of Easter eggs littered throughout, stuff in the background, signs, references, allusions, things to existing superhero properties that I'm not entirely certain how they get away with. But yeah, there's so much stuff in the background that they throw in there that are just like visual gags for people. If you can recognize it and point various things out that
As
have no
Leo
bearing
pointing
on.
at the screen
Yeah, they
moments.
have no
Yeah.
bearing on the story. They're just there because this is the kind of world that would facilitate those characters and those types of characters to all intermingle. Like that. That's baked into the DNA of the story itself. So there's a lot of really fun stuff like that when you're going through it. One of those books you can go through and ignore all the main character, like ignore all the cops from Precinct 10, ignore the dialogue, and just look at stuff in the background and to see like what did they sneak into this page, what did they sneak in here, who is that character supposed to be, this, yada yada yada. There's a ton of stuff like that. It's a lot of fun to go back and look through.
Yeah. I am looking forward to finishing it. I've actually never finished it.
Yeah.
I've read enough of it that I get the vibe,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know how it resolves or ends or
Yep.
if it ends. I mean, obviously, it's not going to be a hard ending now that I know, that there are all these other series and everything out there.
It
Um,
is a hard ending for what they do here. We should mention some of the spinoffs, so like chronologically, what comes right after this is the little miniseries called Smacks, and Smacks being SMAX. Smacks is one of the kind of co-leads that we're introduced to in the first issue. So the first issue starts with a brand new rookie cop showing up for her first day, and
Classic.
her part. So again, this is an idea of she is not new to the world of Neapolis, of not she's not new to the idea that everyone has superpowers, but she's new to the police force. And so she becomes reader avatar as she goes through and navigates what it's like being a cop and what they're investigating, things like that. But her partner is Smacks. Smacks comes from a traditional stereotypical fantasy world that has all the tropes and trappings of a fantasy world. And this Smack series, I think, picks up right after the end. Like the story ends, and then he goes back home to his dimension, and there's a wacky kind of comical adventure. It's much more comical, much more absurdist. Alan Moore wrote that one with Zander Cannon doing the art on that. That's a little 5-issue miniseries. After that, published history is Top 10, the 49ers, which again is Alan Moore, but this is with Gene Ha. Coming out the same year, I think it was in '03. This was an OGN story about the origins of Neapolis, the city, and of the 10th precinct. So that was the start of that. So they did this first 12-issue series. And then right after that, Moore worked with each of the artists to do additional stories. Zander Cannon did the Smack series. Gene Ha did the 49ers. And Smacks is a very weird, very, very, very weird kind of absurdist story. 49ers is pretty cool. It's this historical kind of story about the origins. After that, it gets a little weird. The next series is a miniseries called Beyond the Furthest Precinct, which I don't think anyone from the creative team had any input on. It was written by Paul DiFilippo and art by Jerry Ordway. It was five issues. Yeah, 5 issues. Another story set in the world, but again, I don't think Moore, Cannon, or Ha had any input on this story.
Now, wait 1 second.
Sure.
Because this is a question I meant to ask.
Yeah.
In fact, it was my only question about America's Best. Creator owned? See now that okay, so it's a question in two parts. Part one was America's Best comic creator owned at the time, and what happens when those imprints get folded in? Vertigo was creator owned within DC, but when it gets folded into DC,
it all depends. So like Vertigo is an example. Some Vertigo books are creator owned, and some of them are DC property. Like it kind of depends on what exactly, how exactly the contract was for each of them. I don't know if Alan Moore owns these rights, because again, as it's been reprinted under the Vertigo banner, because after America's Best Comics was shuttered, that 2015 reprint, the one that I read initially, a lot of those America's Best books were folded into Vertigo because that's where it made the most sense at DC. When they shuttered Vertigo the first time, and printed the compendium that you read, one in 2023, probably should have come out on Black Label, as you mentioned. It didn't. It's regular DC. It's all DC in the end, but probably should have been a Black Label book. Now that DC has resurrected Vertigo, I would imagine if they ever do another print of Top 10, which they probably will, because it is a popular book and they can sell it. And again, as you mentioned, Alan Moore books are evergreen. You can always sell them. You always put them out. So if they were to put out another version of Top 10, and maybe not for a while since they just put a compendium out, I would imagine that would probably go back to having a Vertigo label on it. I don't actually know, but I don't know if it's creator owned in the way that a book at Image is. It gets a little murky when you get to some of these imprints at Marvel and DC as to where exactly it stands. But this is a case, I think the IP is owned ultimately by DC. I think so.
Okay. That was my only question.
Yeah.
When I was like,
are
we bending our rule for the podcast for this book?
Well,
and it's sort of, maybe.
Yes, and again, it goes back to similar what we talked about with Ex Machina. Ex Machina was a book that came out on Wildstorm /Vertigo/DC. That is a creator-owned book. I believe that one, because of kind of where it started, its origin, it's a different deal than like a book like Fables, which was created by Bill Willingham, created at Vertigo. He doesn't own those rights. DC owns them. Even though those characters are public domain and things like that, he used it. The deals are different. They're not umbrella across the board for all the same. This is one I don't know. I guess maybe your question is, could someone go to DC now and say, I've got a story for Top 10?
Yeah. If I want to write a Smacks story.
Yeah. If I have another idea,
or I want to do like a Smacks Batman multiverse.
Yeah. Do I have to get permission? Because after this Beyond the Furthest Precinct miniseries, that little 5-issue one, they came back and did what was called Top 10 Season 2. That was Zander Cannon and Gene Hall working together again, plus some other contributors, I think some other co-writers and things like that. That it was supposed to be an 8-issue series with 2 specials that got canceled halfway through. So there's only 4 issues and 1 special. And the book just stops because they didn't get to finish it. Like they didn't get to wrap it up. And it's just been in limbo ever since for the past almost 15 years. It's been out there. 15, 13, it just 50, more than 50 years, I think, at this point. So yeah, could someone go back and say, hey, I have another idea for a Top 10 story and go to DC with it? I don't know. That I legitimately don't know the answer to that question. Or do they have to get permission from the co-creators, from Moore, Ha, and Cannon? Because there's situations like that where they have to do that, where DC owns it, but they need to get the sign off from the creators or things like that. Like that. I don't know how it works. Because this is the kind of series, just by its nature, that like has infinite stories in it. You can just tell stories about a different side of like a different part of Neapolis. You can make as many characters you want and have them interact with the previous, like you could build this out to an anthology world, like an Astro City or a Fables or something like that. Like you could build on it forever. But maybe they
Right.
can't. But
And
it's possible they can't because Alan Moore is no longer involved. And it's entirely possible that those rights are with them and DC can't do it anymore, which would make it more of a traditional creator-owned book. I don't actually know.
yeah, I think it's more control than writing like a DC character, but
Yes,
I don't
but
think they own
yeah,
ever like I
it
I think
probably falls in a nebulous middle space. Yeah, it isn't. It's not writing
but I think it's
Batman.
also one of those things where practically you may have the right to give Alan Moore's characters to someone else to tell a story with. You still have to deal with Alan Moore, and if you want to work with him again, you're not going to go out of your way to piss him off by doing something like that. So,
Well, yes, but
there's the pragmatic
but
side of it.
that bridge has been burned 100 times already by DC. So at this
Right.
point, DC doesn't care anymore. And at this point, I don't think Alan Moore cares either. Like I think he's thrown his hands up. Like with Watchmen, he's thrown his hands up. He's like, they've screwed me out of this. I'm never getting it back. I like no mas.
Right.
Like at this point, if the rights ever did revert back to them, he might turn them down. Because he's so fed up with them. So DC's not losing any sleep over their relationship or lack thereof with Alan Moore. So if they did own the rights and could publish new top 10 stories whenever they wanted, if someone came up with an idea, I don't think the idea that Alan Moore would frown upon it would be a reason for them not to do it.
Fair enough.
So
Yeah. So anyway, that was my only question that I couldn't find a clear answer to, because ABC was just kind of pre-internet. Like, I mean, it's like
yeah.
Like internet existed obviously in the late 90s. I don't want to
Yeah.
misrepresent
I know what
anything
you're
with
talking
Gen
about.
Z,
Yeah,
but yes.
there is not it falls in that nebulous space between for hire work and creator owned work. It's somewhere in that zone. I would imagine, because if I had to guess, I would say it's more creator owned than not. More likely to be more creator owned than not, because his agreement to start America's Best at Wildstorm with Jim Lee happened before the sale of Wildstorm to DC. So he would have made a deal with him at Image at Wildstorm before it moved to DC. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay.
So if I had to guess, I would say it's more likely than not that the creators own this one, because that's where it was, because whatever deal he signed with America's Best / Wildstorm would have been before the sale happened. And then you'd have to honor that in order to keep doing that. So I would guess I'm leaning that way, but I don't know for certain. And maybe the fact that they haven't gone back to top 10 at all, or any of their, like Tom Strong, Promethea. Well, actually, you know what? I think the fact that League of Extraordinary Gentlemen continued on at a different publisher, that probably says it for me now that I think about it. The fact that he was able to continue that elsewhere, away from America's Best after that shuttered and he left, I think tells me that, yeah, probably he owns it. So
Yeah.
if anyone's
Okay.
going back to, I now that I'm kind of working out in real time, I'm going to say I feel much more confident now that it's owned by them, that only they can do it, because he's already done it with another
Yeah.
property.
So the other
America's
story
Best property.
must have been authorized by Alan Moore.
Or and it happened while he was still active, and those creators are still active, because again, right after that, even though Alan Moore wasn't involved with the season 2, that was still Zander Cannon and Gene Ha. So you still had 2 guys from the original creative team working on a follow-up that just didn't get a chance to finish. So yeah, it was authorized in some way to exist, but I'm sure that ship has long sailed now.
Yep. All right. So, without anything else to discuss this episode, we will see you next Thursday to discuss 1 through 7 of top 10.
Yes, 1 through 7. Yeah.
And
Trade number 1, if you can find it, or if you still have it somewhere, because again, pretty certain it's out of print.
I've seen them. I mean, I've seen them
that.
at like used bookstores, and
Wow, I have not.
yeah, I mean, I found like volume 2 of top, so I had like 7 spot issues, and then I bought volume 2, just sure, like I've got to, and this was all before the compendium came out.
Yeah.
I was like, I've got to find this thing. I'm gonna find it for cheap, because I got it like the X library copy for like $3 or something,
Mm-hmm.
and the other issues I got at like, I don't know, cover price of $250 or whatever it was in the late 90s.
Yeah, back in the day, sure.
So I was like, I'm gonna get this and I'm gonna get it for a steal. I just had to suck it up and buy the compendium. But
Well, they're out there. They're out there.
There are trades out there. There are Vertigo trades. There are Wildstorm trades. There are ABC trades, I think.
Those original ABC trades are probably the ones out of print.
And those are probably collectible.
Yeah. So
to some extent.
I think the one that's most available in libraries will be that 2015, that's the
Vertigo,
full edition,
100%.
1 through 12. That's probably the one that's most available. Although the new compendium is probably also available. So if you want to read everything, feel free. But next week we're focusing on 1 through 7. That's what we're going to go with. And this will be an interesting one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. We have not done police procedural. I think the closest we talked about doing Gotham Central, and this is definitely a different book than Gotham Central.
Yeah. It's a different format. It's this procedural aspect. It does have a superhero bent to it. Obviously, a superpower event to it. A bent to it. So yeah, this is a lot of aspects we don't normally cut into. But I think a book like this that has the prestige, that has the acclaim to it, well-deserved, legitimate acclaim. It's going to make for a fun one.
All right, we'll see you next week for 1 through 7. And in the meantime, follow us, Blue Sky Instagram, website storiedarcs.com, and leave us a review and share with a friend.